Adoption and expensive. Two words that do not always belong together. There are 120,000 children in the United States that are waiting for a forever family, and adopting through this option is extremely affordable. I'm Marcy Bursack, an adoptive mom of a sibling pair, and also the author of The Forgotten Adoption Option. Twice monthly, I will interview people like adoptive parents and adopted children who have been touched by foster care adoption. My goal is to find more forever families and increase awareness about foster care adoption, because if it were you or me, we would want someone to do this for us.
In this episode, I'm going to talk with a St. Louis local who I originally crossed paths with during my nonprofit career. Fast forward, we are both now in the corporate world, and we just recently learned of our shared hearts for foster care adoption. Hi, Mary.
Hello, Marcy. How are you?
I am so excited to have you on. You have such a unique story. I've admired Mary as a leader from a distance, and we've been connected on LinkedIn for who knows how long. But something I posted struck a chord with Mary, and she actually spoke out publicly online about being adopted. And my heart was both warmed and very intrigued. And Mary, two things that have stuck out to me as we've prepared for the interview is one, you said that adopting foster care and agencies has always been the simplest process, I think. And then you also said that your adoptive parents paid a $30 adoption fee. So I'd love for you to share more of your story.
I would love to share it.
It's going to be a good one. I can't wait. So tell us, how old were you when you were adopted, and what was that experience like? What do you remember?
So, I was very young. So I was probably 3 or 4 months old when my adopted parents, my parents brought me home. So I was in foster care for those early months. And it's interesting, Marcy, clearly have no, um, memory, right, of being that young and being in foster care.
Sure.
What I will say is, and I believe this 100%, um, that those months that I was in foster care, um, for any baby, those are critical months. And on a cellular level, even though I don't have active working memory of the foster family, I have not a doubt in my mind that they made those really important cellular connections that children need with from the adults. Being held, being rocked, being spoken to, those just fundamental building blocks that build that build our brains.
Yeah. So it sounds like then you were in foster care with one family, like a foster family, and then you were adopted by a different family.
Yes, that is correct.
That's interesting. Have you ever met the foster family?
No, I actually, when I was able to reach out to someone to kind of help me try to find them, the most that they could do was send a letter to their last known address. But what I learned is that they were much older when they were fostering me. So the odds were that they were probably no longer alive. What I had hoped was that maybe if there was still family, that would live in that house, that maybe I, would connect with their children, or grandchildren.
Sure.
But sadly, I have yet to hear back, and that's been at least a year now. So, the odds are that I probably won't get to make that connection, because still by law, the state can't tell me the names of the family that I was in foster
Right.
care with. Yeah.
Right. What an interesting story. So I'm curious then, because you were adopted so young, did your parent, you called them your parents, your adoptive parents, both things, did they tell you you were adopted?
Um, no, not really. I think I found out when I was kind of a kindergarten age. I have an older sister. She's 5 years older than I am, and she was also adopted. And uh, and I remember that she told me that I was adopted, and I remember thinking that understand really what she was saying. And I remember then going to my parents and saying, Julie says I'm adopted. Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we had the conversation.
Wow. So she knew that like whole time.
Yeah, because she remembers when they brought me home.
Sure.
Right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And so were your parents at that time very open with you about why and all the details?
No, and this is something that I think, I love being able to talk to families who choose adoption today, because I think we have come so far in just the societal journey, right, around sort of adoption and what it
Right.
means and why and all of that. But in 1975, it everything was sealed. I remember a story that I think is just telling, um, that a woman that I knew, I met her at a group called RAP, which was Resources for Adopted Parents. And I went to that group, not as an adopted parent, but as an adopted kid, young adult, because there weren't other resources for young people to kind of
Wow.
understand that. So I found the resource I knew, and that was it. And I remember a woman in the group said that she turned to the social worker and she said, "What do I do if she asks about being adopted?" And the answer she was given was, "If you love her enough, she won't ask." And I thought, oh my heavens,
Mary, I'm speechless on the other side of the I didn't know we were going to talk about this. That's interesting.
it's
Okay.
so interesting. And so
Wow.
when I think about the secrecy and the challenges of adopting in the 60s and 70s, and then I think about where we are today, it to me it's almost like nothing short of miraculous. And as an adopted kid who came from a different tradition, in the adoption universe, to see how it is today for families, it makes me so happy. It makes me happy for the birth parents, for the adopted kid, and for the adoptive parents. um yeah.
We've really made big strides. So I'm really curious, like if we zoom back to that scene, did you say you were 17?
Which one?
Whenever you're in this group, this organization, and
Oh,
you're the one adopted child.
yeah, I was probably 16.
Okay. And so do you remember what went through your head? Because at that point you had asked about being adopted. So you're like, are you thinking, well, I guess I didn't love my parents enough because I asked? Like how did you process that?
um I just really remember thinking it was, what a cruel thing
Mm,
to say to someone, because as an adoptive kid, um, children are curious. They should be. We
right.
want them to be. And I all I could think was that it was a cruel statement made by someone who had no real lived experience to
Like they
draw
didn't
from.
have, yeah, they didn't have firsthand experience in the process. They couldn't quite imagine what that would feel like when you actually walked that out. Wow, Mary.
Yeah.
Wow. So okay, you said you're almost kindergarten and you know that you're adopted. Did you tell your friends you were adopted?
I didn't really. And um I mean, I think I probably told a friend or two along the way. I think sometimes it's, as a kid, you're more interested in, climbing the tree house than at 8 than you are, like having a conversation about, adoption. But I remember some um, moments as a child being around mothers who had children, biological children, and realizing how little I knew about what happens when you have a baby. Like I remember not knowing what nursing was, like, because nobody nursed me, and I was like, I remember leaning over my sister and being like, "Did mom nurse me?" And Julie was like, "No, you were adopted." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." Like, so I think that there were times when it came to the forefront, um, but largely it wasn't something that really was talked about very much. And
Sure.
because I didn't come from, again, in 1975, you didn't talk about it. And so there wasn't a culture like we have today. Today we have a culture of talking about it.
Sure.
The good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's all good, right? Like, to be able to talk about all the aspects. But I didn't grow up in a culture of talking about things. In fact, my sister, when she was adopted, um, just before she was adopted, my parents lived in a house, and there was a little boy on the street that was adopted, and someone found out that he was an adopted child, and they put their house up for sale the next day. And that would have been in 19 probably 60.
Because they wanted to move away from that?
Yeah, because someone
Wow.
found out.
Wow.
Right, right.
Wow.
And so by 75, we've made a lot of progress. But it still wasn't open like it is today.
Sure. That is so fascinating because you're right. Like, I think we have made big strides by way of adoption is something that can be talked about. I think sometimes we don't want to hear some of the reasons why people were adopted. I think sometimes those for private reasons, just to protect people, but also just the reality of the implication on the child that went through these things. Sometimes we don't want to face the impact that this child has gone through these things, and now as a result the child needs these particular resources or this help. But
Yes.
I agree with you that from what you're explaining, it sounds like you've certainly made some positive steps forward. And what really stuck out to me in what you just shared was about your question about your own upbringing of, did I do this? Did I nurse? What happened? And it's funny because, or not funny, but like ironic, because I have had a lot of guilt for some time where, and I don't think anyone in like the school system means to kind of leave or people out like me that adopted my kids when they were older, but there'll be questions of like, when did your child start walking? What was their first word? Can you send us a picture from when they were really little? And I like struggle to
Yeah.
find things and find answers. And I was just talking with my daughter who just turned 10. I was talking to her about this guilt that I've had, that I was like, it makes me sad that I don't have those answers for you. Like, I didn't think to ask your biological parents. I don't have those answers. And I feel like you're missing part of your childhood. This is like all in my head, right? Because of it. And it was so sweet. My daughter looked at me and she goes, Mom, I don't care about that stuff. Like, why do you feel bad about that? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know why I've let myself feel guilty for years when this whole time you don't care. Okay, good to know.
Yep. Yep. Yes, it's amazing. Well, and and you touched upon this when you said this, and I think it's fantastic. Everyone has a right to privacy,
Mm-hmm.
but creating a culture of silence is synonymous with shame. So
Right.
I get to choose my level, what I share and don't share, right? That's my private business, my private life. But I don't think that so why someone was adopted or how they came to be, in a particular home, or what their life circumstances, people ask those questions, and I don't always think they should,
Mm-hmm.
for that reason. If they want to ask questions, ask it about the adoption. What was the process? What did you learn? What surprised you the most about, that is something that I think we can and should talk about and celebrate and share those stories. And we can do that without compromising our privacy and our children's
Right.
privacy.
Right. I wholeheartedly agree with you on that in so many ways. And To pivot topics, one thing you said when you commented online, when you were speaking out about your own personal story, is you were saying that bringing light to adoption is, in your words, were needed and long overdue. Why did
Mm-hmm.
you say that? What was on your mind?
Um, so part of what was on my mind, and I remember the post, that you're referring to, and I also remember and I made a post, and a woman that I know in community, attacking me on that post. And one of the things that I was talking about, and it was, Adoption Awareness Month, or something like that, and and I shared something about, being adopted, and how transformational, that has been in my life. And um I want us as a society to also do a better job of helping parents who adopt children to understand that we need to do some of these things kind of in a trauma informed lens. And that was, the woman who had adopted children came on my post or something, and, how dare you, what's wrong with you, I adopted my children, and, they're perfect and I'm perfect and we're perfect. And I thought, well, good for you. I, you're the only ones in the entire world that I know fit that, mold. And I think the point that I was trying to make is, it is a wonderful, wonderful thing. It changed my life, and we could talk about that later. But it also isn't without its own challenges. And when we don't talk about that, it's like gaslighting people. It's, saying to the woman, if you love her enough, she won't ask. That's crazy. And the more open we can be, just to the example, what you did with your daughter, just going to her and saying, I don't have these things. I didn't think to ask for them, and I feel really bad about that. Like, that's wonderful, because you know what? There may come a day when she wishes she had a baby picture, but she's going to remember that conversation with you, and you will have given her permission to have the feelings and a language for it. And that's what we do with those kind of moments of trauma, because trauma isn't always catastrophic, right? It's just those can be those little moments where we face those ways in which maybe we're different.
You're totally right. And it's interesting that you bring up all of that, like the moments to heal and to talk through things. And it's also just, it's funny how we're in this time, funny, ironic, I guess, again, or just interesting, funny, where we're in this time where people can air comments, right? Where you can just put them anywhere you please. Cause I get some sort of flack sometimes where I talk about foster care adoption, and I get people that say you shouldn't become a foster parent to adopt the child. And I'm like, I'm not even saying that, because 3 out of 10 kids that are in a foster home in our country at this very moment, they're not getting adopted, like, for whatever reason, like sort of like your story, they're living with a foster family, and that foster family is not going to adopt them, and they're waiting and waiting and aging and waiting
Yep.
for a forever family. And those are the kids that I'm saying are forgotten, because guess what? Most people probably don't even know they're in foster care, because they're still called foster kids and their parental rights are already terminated. And so I can totally understand what you're saying with, people having different opinions, and that's completely fine. But I think equally, I encourage you and I encourage myself to continue on the path that you're on, because I think the stories that we're telling that are real, that are about things that are trauma informed, that are inclusive, that are bringing things into more healthy light, I think we need to help this happen more often.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree, because we give each other permission. It's that saying, like, where things are cracked, that's okay. That's where the light gets in.
Yes.
And sometimes things are a little cracked, um and so what can I do with that? I can name it, I can talk about it, I can experience the light, or I can turn away and pretend like something isn't broken. And that doesn't work for anybody under any set of circumstances, as far as I know. So, I'm going to choose for me to look at those pieces, maybe, that where things get a little interrupted and it's a different path. And my goal is to lean into those things, with empathy, and be able to nurture both myself and other people, whether they're adults who also have been adopted or children, in my life who have been adopted, by friends of ours, right? Being able to lean into those moments, is important.
I'm so encouraged by this whole conversation. I just feel such positivity, but just honesty from what you're sharing by having experienced this firsthand. It's great.
Thanks. Well, and I recognize that because, at 50 and my sister's, 55, that we come from a different generation, and in some around kind of adoption. And in some regards, I want to be able to continue to tell some of those stories, because we don't really realize where we are and what we have to feel good about and proud of until you sort of go, wow, in her lifetime, that's what it used to be like. And look at where we are now. And I think that, part of having positivity and hope is having something to compare it to and saying, man, we're doing a pretty darn good job on this topic today. How can we do better?
So good. So, Mary, you had mentioned to me off air that you've actually met your biological parents. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So, when I was, in my teen years, probably about 16, 17, that time, that I shared, I was doing the Resources for Adoptive Parents group. And, I was very curious. And you mentioned earlier, talking about, your daughter with the baby pictures and not having them, and, doctor's visits. And I refer to that as biological privilege. And people who know some, like, do you have a history of breast cancer? Do you have a history of, depression? Do you have a history of, and when you spend your life saying, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, that's a challenge, right? And so when people can answer those things freely, the ability to kind of take that for granted, I refer to that as biological privilege. And so
that's powerful.
Yeah. So I think, for me, it was a lot of my curiosity was born from not having that biological privilege. It wasn't that I was searching because I believed that I had some, perfect, wealthy family in a mansion someplace that was just waiting for me to come home and give me a convertible, right? Like, there was none of that going on.
No orphan Annie. All right.
Right. It was, much of what drew me on that quest was, do I have family history? I struggle with major depressive disorder. My children, also struggle with depression. And it wasn't until I had found my mom and discovered that she struggles with depression, that I went, oh my gosh. And I think about, gosh, if I had known that sooner, would that have changed how I approached my health and my health care and my health needs? So that for me was a lot of what got me started on the journey. And interestingly enough, my mother was, in the paperwork that came from the attorney, there was a piece of paper in there that she was not supposed to have. And it was kind of tucked away in there, and it had my birth mother's name. And so when I was a little bit older, I guess at that point, probably early 20s, maybe, she shared that name with me. And that began, chapter 5, of this, long chapter. But I have met my biological mom and dad. And I don't currently have a relationship with my biological mom, but I have a wonderful relationship with my biological dad. Both of my adoptive parents are deceased, and so I get another dad. I have a bonus dad,
Oh,
and we have a fantastic relationship, and that's really been lovely.
it's an interesting way to unravel the story, right? Because you never know what could happen when that happens. And for you, you kind of had one of each. You had one that's like, okay, did
Yep.
it and maintained contact, and or did not maintain contact. And so that's
Yep.
rather interesting because it sounds like you did that as an adult too, which is so healthy. And I've talked to my children about when they're older that we would go do something very similar. So I'm encouraged to hear how that worked out for you. And I'm curious, given everything we've talked about and given your passion around this space, what do you think are things that adults can do to be more supportive of both the adults in their life and the children who were adopted?
I love that question. I think some of it is um, allowing yourself as the friend, or to be able to be curious. I always think, like, people often don't ask because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing or asking it in the wrong way. And at this point in my life, if it comes up and somebody starts asking me questions, I have navigated this universe in a way that I understand that even if you're clumsy in the way that you might ask something, it's probably only because maybe you've never asked it before. And so you're not sure the words quite yet, right? And
Sure.
that's okay. It to the extent that, like, that I'm open about it, and I'm open in situations. I have given people an opening to talk with me about it. Now, they may not want to for whatever their reasons are, and that's fine. But when someone gives you that opening, it's okay to be curious. um, Having said that, there are a couple of nuances that I think I would like to be specific about. Um, and I've heard this a lot growing up, and in talking about being adopted, right? Is this sense that I shouldn't. When I was a teenager, my mother and I argued all the time. Tell me a teenager and a mom who don't argue, you know, when you're
Sure.
going through, right? Like, that's just the life journey, right? But if you'd be arguing, my mom just doesn't understand. There was often a response, when you kind of are critical of anything, like, well, you should be grateful. It's like, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I am. And I get to have all the feels that come along with being a human being. So sometimes I think when people don't know, what to ask or how to interact, there's almost a little bit of gaslighting that can go on. And so I think it's important to just say, like, you don't need to tell adoptive families how they feel or how they should feel or any of that. Let them do that for themselves. And as the supportive friend, um, stay curious, because the more you ask, the more you'll learn. And then the more, when you're out someplace and somebody says, we've been thinking about, adopting, you actually can say, you know what? I have this friend, and she was at, and it's, she talks about, it was amazing. And, like, it's life like everybody's life. It's a family like everybody's family. We all got our bumps and lumps, and, right? But but
Absolutely.
they get to then be an advocate as part of the adoption story, even if it didn't directly impact them. And what a gift for all the kids, to your point, the 3 out of 11 kids, or however many kids, that are waiting and waiting and waiting. And the more we can reach each other in these compassionate and empathetic ways, the better able we are to be able to encourage the people around us to pursue their curiosity that they might want to adopt. And I think that's pretty remarkable.
So well put. That's so good. So I'm curious, as we wrap up, Mary, you mentioned earlier that your life has changed because of all of this, because you were adopted. Can you talk about that?
Sure. I really understood that when I met my biological family. And, my family comes from the Boot Heel in southern Missouri. My mom was 15, when she got pregnant, when she had me. Poverty, the likes of which are pretty staggering. And so when I think about, would I have, had a family and been happy? And sure, maybe. Would I be the person I am today with my family and my degree and a master's degree and working in, the nonprofit sector, all these years to, make life, better for others? And, no, probably not. And so when I think about my footprint on this earth, I think that I have a bigger footprint because of the opportunities that I was given because I was adopted.
Which is huge. It's huge that you can see that, and it's huge that you're aware of it and you're appreciative of it. And there's like an illustration to all of that. Mary, this has been so eye-opening on so many levels. I hope that our listeners found themselves wondering, I wonder how I could be more embracing, or I didn't know that, or like there's just so much that you have spoken that's thought-provoking, that's honest, that's encouraging. And so thank you for being on to share your own story.
Well, thank you for asking me. This is really delightful, and I enjoyed it. And I think this is exactly what I mean when I say, stay curious and, ask people. Everybody wants to tell you their story. People love to talk about themselves.
Well, and we need more people talking about their foster care adoption story. So I love that you were willing to share yours. So thanks a bunch, Mary.
Thank you very much.
As a listener of the Forgotten Adoption Option podcast, you are helping raise awareness about foster care adoption and the 120,000 children who are waiting for a forever family. You can also help raise awareness by leaving a review, subscribing, sharing, talking about, and liking this podcast. If you'd like more information on adopting a child or sibling set through the foster care system, visit my website, ForgottenAdoptionOption.com. There you will find out how to get started, and you can even order a copy of my book, The Forgotten Adoption Option, which will guide you through the entire process, and it is available in paperback, audio, and ebook. I welcome you to reach out with questions, comments, and your own story. I would love to hear if you're signing up for training or where you are in the adoption process. You can connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Just search for Marcy Bursack. Thank you for tuning in, caring, and sharing, because every child deserves a family.